I don't even know where to start. Maybe by thinking back to the family dinner 3 weeks ago. At dinner, my dad looked at my laptop screen and decided that my art was a problem. He had never shown such concern before. At least, he had never explicitly said anything. But that night, his tone was calm and cold, as if he had rehearsed every word. He told me that I needed to stop glorifying the past. No more drawings of mom, no more nostalgic old family scenes. Just like that. Diane, his wife of 2 years, stared at her plate as though it held all the secrets of the universe. And her 7-year-old twins, Ellie and Max, innocently wondered why I never drew them instead. I couldn't give an answer that wouldn't shatter their Disney Channel innocence. The portfolio he wanted me to delete wasn't just a hobby. It was 3 years of work. Stories mom had told me before she died. Moments I could barely remember on my own. It was filled with memories of her teaching me to mix watercolors in the garage, the way she laughed until she snorted, and the lavender she planted that still grew wild by the mailbox. Erasing it felt like losing her all over again. I refused to comply, and the next morning he took my laptop, saying I'd get it back once I prioritized the family I currently had instead of the one I had lost. Diane had always been careful and polite. She never wore mom's perfume or tried to replace her, but she never stirred up trouble either. Yet that same day, she left my old sketchbook on my bed with no note, just the familiar cracked leather cover I hadn't seen since she moved in. I wasn't sure if it was meant as an act of guilt or as a lifeline. Maybe it was both. I started using the school computer lab and saved everything onto a USB drive that I hid in my sock drawer. It wasn't the same. The lab keyboard stuck, and the monitors had a strange blue tint, but at least I could still draw, and I thought I was being clever. Then Dad went through my backpack during one of his so-called random checks and found the printed drafts. He shredded them right there in the kitchen while the twins watched with wide, frightened eyes. He accused me of sabotaging our family, as if keeping Mom alive in a sketchbook was as destructive as throwing a grenade into his perfect life. He ended up grounding me for a month. No after-school clubs and no weekends at Grandma's. When Grandma called, worried because I hadn't missed our weekly lunch in 5 years, Dad dismissed it by saying I was just going through a phase. I stood there, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. Since that day, Diane's behavior had changed. She seemed to hover around me, asking if I needed help with homework or bringing me snacks I didn't even like. It never felt like simple kindness. It felt as if she were waiting for me to somehow break down completely. I understood why Dad was doing this. As a realtor, his whole brand depended on the image of a perfect family man. All those staged photos in his ads, us smiling on a porch swing with Diane's head on his shoulder and the twins giggling, meant everything to him. Meanwhile, my art, raw and messy and filled with memories of a woman he had completely erased from his life, simply didn't fit into his narrative. The twins drew me a picture last week, a picture of all of us holding hands under a rainbow, with their names scrawled in pink and blue crayon. I taped it to my wall and then cried for an hour because they didn't deserve any of this turmoil. They were just kids who only wanted a sister. 2 nights ago, I snuck into Dad's office and retrieved some pieces of my shredded art from his trash can. Even though the pieces were torn diagonally, I could still see the curve of Mom's cheek and the delicate lines of the lavender stems. I hadn't realized that Diane had seen me until the next morning when she handed me a roll of tape and hinted that I would need it. She said nothing to Dad about it, and I wondered why. I confronted her about it yesterday. Standing in the doorway, with her arms crossed, as if holding herself together, she explained that she had lost her own mother when she was 12 and understood my attachment. But she warned me that unless I let go of the past, this house would eventually consume me. She didn't sound like a typical stepmother. She sounded like someone who had already been overwhelmed by her own grief. So here I am, hiding USB drives and piecing together scraps of my mother's face with tape. Dad remains convinced that I'm trying to ruin him, while Diane finds herself caught between a husband who needs a picture-perfect family and a stepdaughter who can't stop unearthing old memories. And the twins just want everyone to smile again. I don't really know what to think. Maybe I'm in the wrong for holding on to a ghost, or maybe it's Dad who's mistaken for expecting me to let go. All I know is that every time I hit save on that lab computer, I'm terrified it might be the last time. Now for the first update. It's been 3 weeks since I last posted, and things, well, they haven't exactly gotten better. I thought losing my laptop was the worst of it, but I was naive. Dad had found the USB drive I'd stashed in my winter boots. He ended up plugging it into his work laptop while I was at school, so when I got home, he was already waiting at the kitchen table. The twins were quietly coloring in the corner, their crayons scraping against the paper like little knives. Without even looking up from his phone, he calmly informed me that everything was gone. It wasn't until I saw the empty folder on the screen that I realized he meant 3 years of work. Mom's stories, her garden, even the way she used to tilt her head when she laughed, just wiped away. I let out a scream, not a dignified one, but a raw, guttural cry that even startled me. Dad merely shrugged and remarked in a tone that implied I'd eventually be grateful, as if he'd done me a favor. The twins quickly retreated to their room, leaving their crumpled drawings scattered on the floor. Diane handed me a tissue from the counter without saying a word. She simply pressed it into my palm and walked away, and that silence cut deeper than Dad's calm detachment. It felt like betrayal, especially after she'd seen me slip those shredded pieces out of the trash and even given me tape. But now, there was nothing. A couple of days later, Grandma arrived unannounced. Dad had been coming up with excuses for why I couldn't join her for our weekly lunches. Something about homework, being grounded, or needing to focus on family, but she wasn't having any of it. She strode in with her purse swinging from her elbow as if it were a weapon and insisted on taking me out for pancakes. Dad refused, his voice tight and firm, insisting that I was being disrespectful toward the household, as though I were a tenant and not his kid. Later, when he wasn't looking, Grandma slipped a note into my jacket pocket that said my mom would be proud and urged me to fight smarter. I memorized every word before tearing the paper into little pieces. I began rebuilding the portfolio during study hall. The school's computers are ancient, and the cloud account they force us to use seems held together by digital duct tape, but at least Dad can't reach it there. I started by drawing Mom's hands, the way they would gesture wildly when she recounted stories of her childhood in Mexico. Then I sketched her favorite sundress, the one decorated with daisies. Every stroke felt like an act of defiance. Last week, Dad sold my drawing tablet. He claimed it was to remove temptation, but I knew the real reason. One of his clients, a woman with a sleek bob and a voice reminiscent of a real estate podcast host, had bought it. She had gushed about how refreshing it was to meet a man who prioritized family values, and the thought made my stomach churn. After class, my art teacher pulled me aside and mentioned that my most recent sketches had come off as rushed, tilting her head in a way that reminded me of Mom's expressions. I ended up lying and blaming it on fatigue. What else was there to say when Dad was systematically erasing every memory of my mom, and I was forced to use a trackpad to capture even her smallest details? Meanwhile, Diane had started rearranging the house. At first, it was little things, swapping throw pillows, moving photo frames. Then, Mom's cherished vase disappeared from the mantel. It was that delicate blue vase she'd picked up at a flea market, chipped on the bottom, yet still perfect. I eventually found it tucked away in a donation box in the garage under a stack of Dad's old golf magazines. When Diane caught me carrying it back to my room, she didn't say a thing. She just stared at me with a hollow expression, as if she herself had lost something irreplaceable. Now, Dad is hosting a client dinner next week, and he decided I should wear Diane's cream sweater instead of Mom's cardigan, the one that still smells faintly of her lavender detergent. He insisted we needed to present a united front, treating our family like a corporate merger. The twins casually asked why I was always so sad these days, and I ended up drawing them a comic about a girl with two families, one captured in photographs and the other in her sketchbook. They didn't quite get the ending. I remember Max pointing at the panel where the girl cried beneath a storm cloud and wondering why she couldn't just live with the happy family. I had no answer. Not long after, Grandma mailed me a prepaid phone so we could talk every night, while Dad assumed I was busy with homework. She shared stories about Mom that I'd never heard before, like the time Mom accidentally dyed her hair green right before a job interview, or how she would purposely sing off-key just to annoy Dad during arguments. I laughed until my ribs hurt, then ended up crying until the screen blurred. Yesterday, I discovered Dad's realty ads. Every new listing featured the twins, Ellie's gap-toothed grin, Max in his dinosaur pajamas, while my childhood photos sat in a box under his desk, right next to a long-forgotten shredder. I managed to tape the shredded art back together, even though it was messy, and the lines were mismatched where the paper tore. I had scanned the pieces at the library so that the cracks wouldn't be as noticeable. Despite the frayed edges, Mom's face was whole. Diane saw the scans on my screen and leaned over, her sharp, floral perfume filling the air. In a soft tone, she remarked that I had Mom's eyes. For a moment, I feared she might try to take the laptop, but instead, she simply walked away. I don't really know what Diane wants from me. Maybe she's tired of being seen as a replacement, or maybe she just pities me, but I can't be sure. All I know is that every time I hit save on that unreliable school computer, I hold my breath, hoping Dad won't take this piece of my past away again. In a way, we're all trying. Diane tiptoes around the house like a ghost. Dad clings to his brochures filled with forced smiles, and I keep drawing even when my hands shake. The twins continue to leave crayon drawings on my bed, simple stick figures with too many fingers depicting all of us holding hands. I tape those sketches up next to Mom's vase. Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe Dad is right and I am tearing us apart. But when I look at those taped up drawings, I don't see any sabotage. I see her. And as long as that remains true, I honestly don't know how to stop. Now for the second update. It's been a month since my last update, and I don't even know where to start. Things escalated in ways I never expected, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I guess I'll just jump in. The client dinner was supposed to be another one of Dad's so-called perfect family performances. He had been hyping it up for weeks, with talk of some big-shot couple relocating from out of state and the kind of clients who cared about wholesome community values. He had even bought the twins matching polos. I had planned to wear Mom's cardigan, the soft gray one, with the loose button at the cuff, but Dad had other ideas. Diane laid out her cream sweater on my bed that morning, the tag still on. She mentioned that Dad wanted everyone coordinated while avoiding my eyes. I waited until the guests were already seated before slipping the cardigan on. Dad didn't notice until after they'd left. The moment the door closed, his face went rigid. He snapped that I didn't understand the idea of a united front as he jabbed a finger at the sweater left on the couch. Diane stepped between us, her voice shaky but firm, explaining that I was grieving and needed to let it go. I had never heard her push back like that, not once in the 3 years she'd been here. For a split second, Dad looked almost stunned. Then he grabbed Mom's vase off the mantel and hurled it at the wall. The sound was like a gunshot. The twins started wailing upstairs, and Diane froze, her hands halfway toward him as if she wanted to stop something that had already shattered. Grandma showed up the next morning at 7 a.m., her keys jangling like wind chimes. Dad tried to block the door, but she bulldozed past him. She observed that I looked exhausted as she cupped my face. Then she turned to Dad and stated that I was coming with her for the weekend unless he wanted the neighbors to hear the reason. He relented, although not without hissing that I was making a mistake as I slid into her car. At her house, Grandma pulled out a box of Mom's old journals. We spent hours piecing together fragments of her life, recipes, doodles, and notes about my first steps. I had forgotten how she used to call me her little bumblebee. Grandma helped me scan everything, her fingers trembling a little on the mouse. She chuckled and noted that Mom hated technology and would have loved this. We titled the digital book The Stories She Gave Me. When we printed copies at her church, the secretary paused at Mom's photo and quietly mentioned that she still used her zucchini bread recipe. I didn't know whether to smile or cry. Dad found the book 2 days later. He had been rifling through my room again and held it up like evidence. He accused me of being determined to humiliate him. His threat to cut my college fund didn't even sting anymore. By then, the fear had hardened into something else. The next morning, Diane drove me to school with her knuckles white on the steering wheel, and at a red light, she blurted that she was trying. I didn't ask what she meant. Then came the art showcase. My teacher required everyone to submit a piece for the school exhibit, so I chose the scanned, taped-up drawings. The tears were still visible, the edges jagged where I had reassembled them. Dad's client, the one who had bought my tablet, showed up unexpectedly. She lingered at my display with a furrowed brow, questioning why my work appeared so dark, and noting that Dad had never spoken of any of this. I could only shrug. Later, Dad stormed into the principal's office and demanded that the pieces be removed, but they refused. That night, as he slammed the front door, he accused me of poisoning his reputation. Diane left the next day for a weekend at her sister's with the twins, explaining to Dad that she needed space to think as her suitcase rattled down the stairs. He blamed me, accusing me of tearing the family apart as he pocketed my car keys. I started walking to school, the November chill biting through Mom's cardigan. When the twins came back, they were quieter. They sketched together at the kitchen table, their heads nearly touching, and slipped the drawings under my door. One drawing showed our house with a giant crack down the middle. Another depicted me floating in the clouds beside a woman with Mom's curly hair. They didn't understand the fights, but they knew enough to sense the fractures. Grandma's lawyer thinks I have a shot at custody once I turn 17. Dad laughs it off, but I've seen him pacing the backyard at night with his phone pressed to his ear. His clients are dropping him. One even canceled after the showcase, citing instability, and his office manager called it a PR issue. I wish I felt guilty. The strangest part is that the art went viral at school. Not TikTok viral, but kids I hadn't spoken to in years started stopping me in the hallway. A girl from my bio class brought me a stack of printed photos she had found in her mom's yearbook. Mom at 16, grinning in a drama club costume. Another friend donated a spare tablet her brother had left behind. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost. Dad has started hiding in his office, scrolling through listings. The other day, I caught him staring at a photo of Mom on his desk, the one he usually keeps face down. Diane is back, though she sleeps in the guest room. Sometimes I hear her crying through the wall. I don't know if it's for her, for me, or for the mess we're all trapped in. I keep the twins' drawings taped next to my bed. They're messy, full of stick figures and lopsided hearts, but they remind me that not everything here is broken. Maybe Dad is right. Maybe I am selfish. But selfishness feels a lot like survival when your world keeps shrinking. 3 months until I'm 17. 3 months until I can leave. Some days, that is the only thing that keeps me breathing. Now for the final update. It's been 2 months since my last update, and honestly, I'm still processing how much has changed. Some days it feels like I'm watching someone else's life unfold. One of those indie films where the ending isn't happy or sad, just real. When I turned 17, Grandma's lawyer formally notified Dad about revisiting custody. He laughed it off at first, waving the letter around the kitchen as if it were a joke, though his grip left creases in the paper. Diane stood by the sink, still scrubbing a plate long after it was clean. The twins hovered in the doorway, clutching their stuffed animals. They've even started trailing me around lately, quiet and wide-eyed, as though they're scared I might disappear mid-sentence. Dad lost 2 more clients. His office manager described the situation as reputational turbulence, essentially corporate speak for nobody trusting a guy who can't keep his own house from falling apart. I found out when he came home slamming cabinet doors and ranting about ungrateful leeches. Diane flinched every time a dish rattled. Later, she slid a note under my door mentioning that there was a library event the next day and asking me not to tell him. The library showcase was meant to be a small gathering, just a few local artists and some retirees passing time. But Mom's old friends showed up. Mrs. Nguyen from the bakery brought a photo of Mom at 22, covered in flour and laughing. Mr. Carter, her high school drama teacher, recounted a story about her playing Lady Macbeth and accidentally toppling a prop crown. I stood there clutching the repaired vase Diane had given me, its cracks filled with gold glue, and realized I wasn't the only one holding on to her memory. Dad stormed in halfway through, his face blotchy, but the librarian, a no-nonsense woman sporting a silence please pin, intercepted him before he could reach me. She warned him that he needed to leave quietly or be escorted out. He left, not without shouting that I would regret it. The room fell silent. Someone's phone buzzed, and then Mr. Carter clapped slowly, as if we'd returned to one of his theater classes, and the moment passed. That night, Dad informed me that I was no longer his daughter, saying it with the same calm detachment one might use when commenting on the weather. Diane stood in the hallway with Mom's vase in her hands. She neither defended him nor me. She simply pressed the vase into my arms and whispered that it was time. An hour later, Grandma picked me up while the twins slept with their door cracked just enough to let the hall light in. Living with Grandma is different. Her house smells of cedar and the lavender perfume Mom used to wear. There are photo albums everywhere. Mom as a toddler in a pumpkin costume, Mom graduating college, Mom cradling a baby me with that half-exhausted, half-wonderful expression new parents get. It feels like stepping into a museum of the life Dad tried to erase. Dad's brokerage demoted him to a desk job. No client meetings, no glossy ads showcasing his perfect family. Now he's selling the house. Diane called last week to ask if the twins could visit. They brought along a drawing they'd made of me standing in Grandma's garden with towering sunflowers and a smile on my face. In one corner, they had scribbled a stick figure of Mom, a yellow tangle of hair. The older twin remarked that I looked happy there, and I didn't have the heart to correct her. I mailed Dad a USB drive loaded with all my art, the repaired scans, the library photos, even the twins' drawings. I attached a note telling him to erase that file too, because I had copies elsewhere. He never replied, but the twins mentioned that he's been spending nights in his office, the blue glow of his laptop reflecting in the window. Grandma helped me set up an online store for my prints. The first sale went to Mom's childhood best friend, who sent a rambling email recounting their treehouse adventures. I ended up crying while reading it. Then I bought a frame for the twins' drawing and hung it next to Mom's senior portrait. I ran into Diane at the grocery store, and the encounter was awkward. We reached for the same jar of marinara, and she abruptly jerked her hand back as if she'd been burned. For a minute, we just stood there, staring at the shelves, until she apologized in a trembling voice for not being like her. I hugged her, not because I forgave her, but because I finally understood that she wasn't the villain, just another person trapped in Dad's crumbling world. Last week, Dad's brokerage let him go. The twins' nanny mentioned he's been packing up the house alone, boxing up Diane's things along with his own. I can't help but wonder if he'll keep the family photos or discard them like he tried to discard me. Yesterday, the art school acceptance letter arrived. Grandma immediately framed it beside Mom's diploma, her hands shaking the entire time as she kept saying that Mom would be so proud. I think I believe her. This morning, the twins video called. Their new nanny had just taught them watercolor painting. Behind them on the wall hung a sketch of me. Not a stick figure, but a detailed drawing capturing Mom's curls and the cardigan she left behind. The younger one explained that they were just practicing. For the first time, I saw Dad in the background, half out of frame, staring at their easel. He didn't wave. I don't know if things will ever be okay between us, but I'm beginning to realize that okay isn't the point. I have Grandma's snorting laugh when I show her memes, the twins' art taped above my desk, and a folder on my laptop labeled backups, backups, backups. Maybe that's enough.